Thank you for your interest in micromobility. The Florida Department of Transportation District 2's Community Traffic Safety Program is committed to education, outreach, and the goal of Target Zero. Let's dig into what micromobility looks like in Northeast Florida and how we can help reduce serious injuries and deaths on our roadways. In this presentation, we'll discuss what micromobility is and isn't. We'll look at the increased popularity of micromobility nationally and its use in Northeast Florida, and consider some of the safety challenges associated with the increased use of micromobility devices while keeping in mind the goal of zero fatalities on our roadways. How micromobility is defined is important because the functional and legal definitions determine the rights and responsibilities of micromobility device users operating on public streets, and accordingly how law enforcement, public safety educators, and transportation planners and engineers can work to help improve safety outcomes. Let's review the definitions of micromobility from a functional or industry perspective and a legal perspective based on Florida statutes. From an industry perspective, a micromobility device must be fully or partially electrically powered. They must be lightweight, under 500 pounds, and have a relatively low speed, under 30 miles per hour. Examples of micromobility devices include powered bicycles, also known as e-bikes, standing scooters, seated scooters, self-balancing boards like Segways and some hoverboards, non-self-balancing boards, powered skates, and a range of other similar devices. Golf carts and neighborhood electric vehicles are too heavy to be considered micromobility devices. Traditional human-powered bikes, skateboards, and scooters with no electric assist are also not micromobility devices. To this list, we could add a range of gas-powered devices like mopeds, mini bikes, and riding lawnmowers, since all of these rely on internal combustion engines rather than electric motors. Let's look at how micromobility is defined in Florida law. Section 316.003 of the Florida statutes has well over 100 terms related to vehicles and roadway infrastructure. A selection of statutory definitions related to micromobility is listed below. These have been added and edited as technology has evolved, both concerning lightweight, powerful batteries and the advent of smartphones to manage shared mobility networks. Key among the statutory definitions is how Florida defines a motor vehicle, or in our context, how certain devices, including devices conforming to the industry definition of micromobility, are excluded from being included as motor vehicles. Florida statutes narrows the definition of micromobility device to for-hire or rentals hailed by a smartphone app or website. This distinction between for-hire and personally owned devices relates more to the regulatory authority provided to local government than the operation of these devices in the roadway. For example, our statutes also define various classifications of electric bicycles and stipulate that for legal purposes, in terms of user rights and responsibilities, these are considered the same as human-powered bicycles. The statute also defines motorized scooter as a device with or without a seat, and among other features, a maximum speed of 20 miles per hour or less. Motorized scooters and for-hire micromobility devices are also considered to be essentially the same as human-powered bicycles in terms of rights and responsibilities in the public right-of-way. However, local governments have the authority to regulate both for-hire and privately owned micromobility devices. This regulation under Florida's home rule principle includes the ability to prohibit use on trails and sidewalks and regulation of for-hire devices up to and including prohibition. However, local governments may not require a valid driver's license, impose helmet requirements for riders age 16 or older, or require registration and insurance. The regulatory authority of local government is similar to its authority over bicycles for the devices themselves. The generic definition of micromobility device refers to low-speed, electrically powered devices primarily designed for use by one person. Florida statute defines the term as shared, for-hire vehicles and grants local governments authority to regulate these services. Other definitions within statute define the devices themselves and provide that they be considered the same as bicycles concerning how they operate in the roadway. Micromobility use is on the rise nationally and in Florida. Understanding how micromobility is defined functionally and legally is crucial. In 5 years, from 2016 to 2019, the use of shared for-hire devices has increased more than sevenfold. Use accelerates as fleets of scooters and e-bikes are deployed in more cities. While micromobility differs from active transportation modes like walking and pedaling a bike, the safety and infrastructure focus are similar. Micromobility devices are treated the same as traditional bicycles from a legal perspective because they generally have similar speed, maneuverability, and weight. Accordingly, strategies to enhance bicyclist safety, as well as strategies to make streets safer for pedestrians, will generally benefit micromobility users as well. The growing popularity of micromobility devices can be attributed to their utility for trip making in the 0 to 5 mile range, where 60% of all trips occur. While traditional bicycles are also helpful for this range of trips, they require more effort and are less appealing for many users, especially during hot Florida summers. The infrastructure options to make micromobility safe and effective are similar to those for cycling, namely lower stress facilities. When we think about low stress, we generally refer to increased separation from higher speed, higher volume motor vehicle traffic. While sharing a high-speed arterial with cars and trucks represents the highest stress environment for cyclists and micromobility users, conventional bike lanes or buffered bike lanes lacking a physical barrier can be intimidating for many users. Accordingly, networks that include low-stress facilities such as protected bike lanes, shared use paths, bike boulevards, and cycle tracks will be more appealing to and improve the safety outcomes of a broader group of conventional bicycle and micromobility users. Specific to shared for-hire devices, there are also infrastructure needs concerning how these devices integrate into the public right-of-way when not in use. Local governments must consider whether shared devices will be stored in fixed docks, deposited in corrals placed throughout a service area, or operated as dockless devices with potential walkability and ADA consequences. Part of the infrastructure of offering shared micromobility is a crew of workers responsible for rebalancing devices throughout a service area, charging rundown devices, and generally ensuring that dockless devices are parked in such a way as to not impede pedestrian mobility. Shared micromobility services are not currently as common in Northeast Florida as in other parts of the state. To date, 3 communities have active contracts with micromobility providers. In St. Augustine, one operator provides app-based shared electric bikes. Riders must be at least 18 years old to get an account, and the bikes are stored in physical docks when not in use. In the city of Jacksonville, 4 companies operate e-scooters. These must be parked in designated corrals, and riders also must be at least 18 years old. In scenarios where devices must be physically docked or placed within designated corrals, riders who leave their device elsewhere generally pay a premium of a few dollars. 3 vendors provide shared dockless scooters in Gainesville and within the University of Florida campus. As noted above, dockless scooters, if parked irresponsibly, can create more challenges for pedestrians, but offer riders the most convenience. Now that we've discussed what micromobility devices are and their general role in our transportation system, we can consider challenges associated with this emerging mode and strategies to mitigate risk. Again, the physical and operating characteristics of micromobility devices are most similar to conventional human-powered bicycles, with some important differences. The principal difference between a conventional bike and an e-bike or powered scooter is that relatively high speeds can be attained without much user effort or engagement. So while traveling at 20 miles an hour on a conventional bike generally falls within the realm of rigorous exercise for the vast majority of people, achieving the same pace on an e-bike or scooter requires only a flick of the wrist. This distinction shows up in some of the differences in micromobility device and bicycle crashes, including higher injury rates and higher rates of crashes among new, inexperienced riders. Other data points to micromobility users' tendency to switch between operating as a pedestrian and a cyclist, and includes crashes related to roadway, sidewalk transitions, and disregarding traffic control at intersections. Lack of experience is a critical factor. Data collected by the City of Austin shows that 30% of all injuries occur on a user's first micromobility trip. This points to a need for more interventions for new users, which could include more rigorous training or potential speed governing for inexperienced riders. Because micromobility users often lack the experience, they are likely to have less tolerance for operating in traffic and are therefore more likely to ride on sidewalks or switch between sidewalks and the roadway. In addition to crashes navigating curbs and driveway aprons, pedestrians have a greater risk than general bicycle traffic. Most micromobility services are deployed in downtown areas, resulting in crash risks with fixed objects like street furniture, garbage cans, parking meters, and light poles. To reduce the risks associated with sidewalk riding, local governments can prohibit the operation of micromobility devices and conventional bicycles on sidewalks. However, these ordinances are generally difficult to enforce. The effectiveness of geofencing by micromobility vendors to regulate sidewalk use and speed has generally been overpromised by vendors. But emerging 5G deployment may make this a more effective tool. A solution is to provide quality, low-stress infrastructure for conventional bikes, e-bikes, and scooters. Dockless parking presents a separate set of hazards for pedestrians and may block accessible pathways for persons with disabilities. These impacts can range from mere nuisance to a legitimate safety hazard, especially if people deviate into travel lanes to navigate irresponsibly parked micromobility devices. Another safety challenge is the lack of accurate crash data. The last substantial revision of Florida's crash report was in 2011, only a few years after the arrival of the smartphone and before the advent of most shared mobility services. Current crash report forms lack adequate coding to separate crashes involving micromobility device users from other vulnerable road user groups. Further, crashes between micromobility users and pedestrians or bicyclists do not technically involve a motor vehicle. There's no requirement that they're reported to the Department of Highway Safety and Motor Vehicles. Our community traffic safety team members play an essential role in developing and implementing strategies to address these safety challenges. This includes working with local governments to include best practice provisions in micromobility vendor contracts concerning geofencing and management of the public right-of-way, planning, design, and construction of low-stress bicycle infrastructure to provide for overall mobility advantages, and working with businesses, chambers of commerce, and local law enforcement to provide educational material to tourists and other potentially inexperienced micromobility users. This concludes the Community Traffic Safety Program presentation on micromobility. Please use the chat or email link to ask questions or offer further discussion.